If you were a kid or an early teen back in the mid-2000s who watched a lot of Nickelodeon, you most likely heard of Danny Phantom. To those of you who didn't, please accept my apologies for missing out. But the show focused on a teenage superhero trying to balance his socially awkward high school life while fighting the villain of the week. What made Danny unique though was his ghost powers. We've seen other heroes fly and shoot laser beams from their hands, but Danny had a lot more interesting powers in the form of invisibility, intangibility, figure shifting, and even cloning himself. I loved this show back when it aired, and I don't think I exaggerate when I say I watched all of it from beginning to end at least 5 times. Danny was the kind of hero I always yearned to be like. His rogues gallery was creative and cool, there were plenty of great action scenes, funny moments, and of course, we had the best superhero catchphrase of all time, no questions asked.
I'm going ghost!
The show may have ended years ago, and yes, Butch Hartman has long ago lost his way, but I still remember the show fondly and I would still recommend it in case you haven't checked it out. But if you clicked on this video, I believe you've seen the show and just like me, The Ultimate Enemy is your favorite episode from it. The more I talk to fans of the show about it, this episode always seems to be most people's favorite, including Butch Hartman's, and I totally agree. I still remember the day I first watched it, not knowing anything regarding its content, and being smacked on the head by a bunch of plot twists, a new power, and a GBA game of all things. Everything about this episode left a huge mark on me, and whenever I make the argument that kids can handle dark cartoons, this is the prime example I'm bringing up. However, despite my love for this episode, there's a huge time-traveling flaw within it that either breaks it entirely or makes it even better and more psychotic than ever before. But, for the sake of formalities, and catching you up in case you haven't seen the episode in a while, or in general, here's a quick summary. 10 years into the future, we see a grown-up Valerie Gray protecting Amity Park from ghost activities alongside her father. Turns out there's a new terrifying ghost which seems to be their biggest target yet. Who is this ghost? Well, it's none other than Danny Phantom, who may have actually lived long enough to see himself become the villain. Clockwork, the ghost of time, is hired by a group of ghosts known as the Observants to kill Danny in the past and thus preventing this future from happening. Back in the present day, Danny is stressed about taking the CAT test, which will determine his future career. Which, by the way, I'm not an American as you can probably tell. Does this test actually exist in the States? I was always curious about that. Anyway, through Clockwork's intervention, Danny ends up accidentally getting the answers for the test from his teacher, and actually considers cheating on it. Through more events and fight scenes, Danny and his friends meet Clockwork, who explains to them Danny will eventually turn evil and become the cause to a bunch of catastrophes. The trio makes it to the future and not only discovers that Sam Tucker and Danny's whole family died in an explosion, but also meets the future version of Danny, who shows little mercy or compassion to his former friends and his younger self. Tucker and Sam manage to escape back to the present, but Danny is stuck in the future due to his older self trapping him there by phasing a time medallion into his body. While Danny is stuck in the future ghost zone, Dark Danny, or Dan as the GBA game calls him, goes back to the past under the guise of his younger self in order to assure his existence. Danny's older sister, Jazz, discovers Dark Danny's plans to cheat on the test after trapping Danny in the future and sends a note for her brother in the hopes he'll get it. He does and comes across an old and beaten down Vlad Masters, who tells Danny of the events which led to his turn to the dark side. Being the sole survivor of the explosion, Danny asked to move into Vlad's mansion in Wisconsin, as he had no one else who would take him in or understand the situation. While there, Danny asked Vlad to remove his sorrow caused by the events, but ended up separating Danny's human and ghost halves. Bitter, Danny Phantom separated Vlad's human and ghost halves as well, merging with the latter and giving birth to his now evil self, while killing Danny Phantom. Without much of a choice, Danny asks the future Vlad to use the same gauntlets he did in the past in order to remove the time medallion and get Danny back to his time period. Meanwhile, Dark Danny cheats on the tests, which prompts Mr. Lancer to meet up with him and his parents near the Nasty Burger. The time comes, but as soon as Lancer puts forward the accusation, Tucker and Sam show up and warn everyone about the explosion, and Jazz reveals Dark Danny's disguise. After Dark Danny traps his family and friends near the Nasty Burger, Danny returns to the present in order to fight his older self. Dark Danny explains that his main strategy doesn't involve killing his past self, but to make sure he wastes time fighting him until history repeats itself. While Danny manages to beat and trap his future self using the ghostly well, time does run out and the Nasty Burger explodes. However, Clockwork shows up to stop time and reveal to Danny that not only did he save his loved ones, but that he also knew these events, which would be considered out of sequence, could happen. He takes Danny back to the time of the CAT and gives him the chance to return the answers to Mr. Lancer instead of cheating. Danny does just that, has a heart-to-heart with his sister about his ghost powers, and Dark Danny is stuck with Clockwork with a false hope that he'll ever return. Yeah, that sure didn't happen. Now, to remove any doubts, this episode is still great. Everything I loved about it back then still holds up today, and I never get tired of watching it. The plot is one of the most interesting I've seen. I love how it can go super dark and not being restrained by being aimed at kids. Eric Roberts' performance as Dark Danny is one of the best from the show's celebrity guests.
Nice try, Jazz. But me, my future, I'm inevitable.
And the lessons of every action having consequences and learning how to give people another chance are good lessons to teach. There are some animation errors, like characters who are supposed to be wearing medallions suddenly don't wear them and then they come back, which I only point out since it matters to the plot, but overall this is still my favorite Danny Phantom episode, and probably one of my favorite episodes in any TV show ever. So what is that time travel flaw I mentioned? Well, it's an established fact that Danny will become evil after cheating at the CATs, which would lead to him losing his family and friends and moving in with Vlad as a last resort. He then asks Vlad to remove the pain, and you know the drill. Danny, and by extension the audience, learn this from Vlad in the future. When Danny comes back to the present, Dark Danny says that he needs to stall until the explosion will occur again and ensure his future. That's all well and good, but if Danny knows the reason for his transition to Dark Danny, then couldn't he just not move in with Vlad after the explosion? Even if he does go through with that, wouldn't he know not to go through the operation? The episode frames the explosion at the Nasty Burger and the death of Danny's loved ones as the one thing which sets Danny's life on a set path to becoming evil, when in truth, the actual events which lead to Dark Danny come after that. Even the GBA game makes that mistake with its extra story. The game follows the basic plot of the episode without much deviation. However, after you beat the game and choose the save file in which you beat it, a continuation story not featured in the episode starts, where Clockwork informs Danny that he'll still become evil despite not cheating during the CATs. After completing all the missions, it turns out Dark Danny asked Vlad to have a backup plan for his existence in case the explosion is prevented. Granted, the game may not matter much when it comes to the plot of the episode itself, but both continue to imply that the explosion is the main cause for Danny's transformation, when both also feature the explanation of Danny wanting his sentence removed, and that resulting in Dark Danny's birth. So by all accounts, even if Danny couldn't have stopped the explosion and Clockwork hadn't intervened, he would have known there's another way to prevent himself from growing up into his evil version. In addition to that, there's also Dark Danny's plan, which, let's be honest, doesn't make much sense on the surface. While the cause for the explosion in the timeline in which he came from remains unclear, it's highly hinted at that it caught everyone by surprise and Danny remained a sole survivor. That much is clear, but now with regular Danny aware of his future, Dark Danny ends up traveling to the past in order to make sure things play out the same way, which includes making sure his loved ones die by tying them up to the reactor, and he basically kills them himself. Now think about it. If you knew you had the chance to go back to the one point things fell apart for you, Wouldn't you rather change those events and saving yourself from turning evil instead of making sure you'll turn evil? Again, on the surface, it doesn't make much sense for a person to cause the exact event which ruined his life. But when you stop and think about it, that's also what makes Dark Danny such a badass and terrifying villain. He doesn't care about saving his family and friends, because he doesn't care about saving himself. And the reason he doesn't care is because all he's left with is the pain and sadness he experienced 10 years prior. Here's where the brilliance and also tragic truth of the episode lies. When Danny arrives at Vlad's mansion, he asks for the pain to go away, and Vlad makes sure to remove those sad emotions from him, resulting in Fenton and Phantom separating. Considering Danny Phantom never acted as he does in this scene after separating from Fenton, it could be implied Phantom represented the sadness and anger he felt after losing his loved ones and failing to save them. Thus, after merging with Vlad, who is a frustrated and lonely individual, all those negative emotions created a ghost who's incapable of love of any kind. And that's the point when I realized the Dark Danny isn't the product of a tragedy or an operation, but depression. When this realization hit me, it also kinda solved the logic problem. Somewhat. Danny would have turned into Dark Danny anyway, regardless if he went with the procedure or not, most likely due to his trauma and depression. As someone who dealt with depression for plenty of times throughout his life, the main thing it's making you feel is like everything is pointless. Why do this? Why bother with that? Why try when it's essentially pointless? Dark Danny, in a psychotic kind of way, doesn't want to save his loved ones because he doesn't see the point. He considers this an effort or an acceptance that he could start anew, but he sees it as futile and pointless. I didn't think about the fact that traveling to the past in order to ensure his future is an effort, but to him it really isn't. He even tells Jazz that no matter what possible scenario his younger self can think of, his victory is assured. He also pulls his entire mission in the past with no effort until Danny shows up. Remaining evil was the easy way out for him, the point where he's fully given up. I'm aware that I may be reading too much into this, especially when the creator of the show is an idiot who calls people with problems like depression lazy and shit, but that's also part of the fun. Trying to connect the dots and come up with your own conclusions regarding this. The time logic may still be faulty, but thinking and theorizing about it means you like going back. And that shows just how strong a piece can be at the end of the day. Before wrapping up, can we talk about the animation error of Danny being forced out of his ghost form after using the ghostly well for the first time, and his head is his human head but his body is the ghost body? That is seriously the most uncanny thing in this episode, about all the main cast tragically dying and the hero becoming a psychotic mass murderer. It's only there for a few seconds, but man, this error stuck with me because how in the hell do you miss something like that? Well, anyway, bye bye for now.